So I'm just going to go ahead. I enable auto numbering, which means that it just auto numbers my records 1, 2, 3, 4. I find that the best practice. I don't like using PHI in my record names because then it shows up in your browser URL. So if you use MRN as your record ID, then every computer you look at and you view REDCap information, it's going to have MRNs cached in the browser history. So I don't like to do that. We go to the online designer, and this is where you define your forms, your CRFs, your instruments. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use something called the shared library because I think my research project is something that other people have probably thought of before. It's a very intuitive question. And so it turns out, indeed, there is a survey in the research library about nodules. Now, I could be doing something like, PROMIS is a very NIH-funded, standardized survey format. There's a lot of PROMIS instruments that you can go ahead and download. But I am searching for nachos, and voila, there it is. All right, so I'm going to take that instrument. I could preview it, but I know it's what I want. I'm going to import it into my project, and I say, yes, I agree, and I'm going to call this the nacho craving assessment. There we go. Go back to my previous page, and now here I am. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this default first instrument because I don't really want it. And I'm just going to have the nacho craving. I'm going to open it up. You'll notice the first field in my project is my record ID. Every REDCap project usually starts out with a record. It used to be called study ID. And this is your sort of your record number, your record name. You don't want to delete that. Now it kind of prevents you from deleting it. That's the main key that holds all your data together. So you want to treat it with respect. You don't want to rename it to another variable name once you've added data, because then it's going to orphan all of your data. So in order to do this study, I'm going to add some questions. This is using the online designer. These are the different types of questions I can add. It's probably about 1/5 the size of what you can do in Qualtrics, but it kind of covers most of what people want to do. So I'm going to start with just a text box. I'm going to say, what's your first name? And I'm going to call the variable is all lowercase and underscores for spaces. And I recommend you put some thought into how you want to name your variables in your projects. If you have a lot of them, hundreds of them, I oftentimes do it sort of by grouping. So let's say I've got 50 questions around demographics. I might go D underscore and then have the name of the variable. And then I might have medical history, MH underscore. And that way, when you're exporting all of your data, you can just quickly glance at all of your different field names. And you can kind of tell what group they're in. And I can show some examples if anybody has questions about that. Here's validation. So even though I'm just doing a text question, there's a number of ways that I can validate this text. I can validate it as a date time, as a date time with seconds, integer, numbers, phone numbers, zip codes, and we can also add custom ones. So here's an example of a project where they really wanted to have 4 text characters, A through Z, a hyphen, then another text character, and then 3 digits. And if you try to do anything other than that, it doesn't let you. So we can write our own custom validators too. So I'm going to put this in, first name, then we need to know if I'm going to tell whether or not men are more machismo with spicy stuff, then I'm going to need to figure that out. So I'm going to add a radio button question, and I'm going to say 1 for male, 2 for female. So anytime you do radio questions or checkbox questions, you're storing a coded value in the database. You're not storing the text label for the value. So in this case, my text label is male, but my coded value is 1. And so if you export your data in the raw format, you're just going to see 1s and 2s and 3s. And so you want to think about how you want those numbers to work. If you have a list that's going to be expanding, I see this all the time. Someone has a list of the surgeon that did the procedure. And they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they make 6 other. And then after 2 months, a new surgeon comes in, and they're like, oh, I got to start doing that one. So they change 6 from other to Dr. Smith, and then they make 7 other. When you make a change like that, if you think about the database, it's got all these 6s, and all of a sudden 6 no longer means other, it means Dr. Smith, and you've just recoded all the other patients to this new doctor. And so there are some things you got to be a little careful about, and there's some help. And the good news is when you're in production mode, REDCap will prevent you, well, it'll send an email to me and I'll try and prevent you from doing these sorts of changes. So you don't need to be too worried about it, but things to think about. We'll call this sex. save. Then I'm going to go ahead and add height. And I like to put units for any measure. So let's do height in what, centimeters? And, oh, I did a radio button. I don't want a radio button. I want a text box. There we go. Height in centimeters. I could validate this as just an integer. I don't want people to give me decimals. Let's round to the nearest centimeter. Save that. Then I'm going to go ahead and add one more field, weight. And in this case, let's say in kilograms. Sure.
One thing you're all aware of is you all need to have data dictionaries, which basically tell you the definitions of each of the fields. And in the past, we always sort of kept separate files for these definitions, or let's call it definition dictionary. You can build that into your field note. And if you're going to have multiple people entering data, it's a really good idea to have all your definitions here. And then that way you're not, and if you update your definition or, refine it, then at least everybody that's entering data is going to be able to see that.
So we could go ahead and put parentheses and say this is the email address. And then if you want, if you know HTML, you can go ahead and you can font size, smaller. You can go ahead and you can use HTML in here as well.
And so another example would be like, when weight and height, well, when is the weight and height? At the time that the patient first came to you, or is it their max weight and height? So those are the kinds of things we want to build into that field.
Then I'm going to break the nacho questions into a separate section. So there's a thing called the section editor, and I'm going to say nacho section. All right, so now we have all that in. I could be, I want that to be bigger. I'm going to make it a heading, an H3 label. And now it's going to be even bigger. So I've got my basic assessment put together. So let's return to my questions. So I want to go ahead and I want to collect this data. I can either do it in paper and do data entry, but that's really painful. Why not just have the people submit it directly? And in this case, it's a public survey. So I'm going to go ahead back to my project setup. I'm going to make this a survey. Then I go back to my online designer. And I'm going to enable this as a survey. So now this form, that was a data entry form, I've just turned it into a survey. That means it now has a URL, and people from outside that don't have REDCap accounts, that don't have SUNET IDs, are able to fill this information in if they get the proper link. So let's see, I'm going to turn off question numbering. I don't care much for question numbering. I can add a logo to the top of the survey, so I think I have one here. So I'm going to put that in, and there's a number of other options. You can do save and continue later for very long surveys. But I've got it going, and now I've got this new feature, Manage Survey Participants. And so I have a URL for my survey. And if I go in and I make that URL, save it. Hopefully it's saved. Oh no. Let's do one quick. Cheating here. All right, so that's done. So now, if we go back to our talk and mess up our resolution, if you have a phone, go ahead and see if you can type this into your phone. But it is case sensitive, so the N and the M have to be uppercase. But bit.ly, not show me. And you should, hopefully, be taking this survey. So let's see what happens if I click on it. Oh, yep, looks like we're getting there. Let's go back and fix our resolution. And so we can go through and take this. So I can say, what is my first name? Is Andy. I'm male. What is my height? in centimeters. Oh boy. 2.54 times 72, 6 feet plus 2 inches, 74, is that right?
You can actually plug that formula into there, so the person can enter inches, and it will automatically convert to centimeters.
Okay, that's probably pretty, I'm gonna say 99. Okay. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong? 99 isn't the expected format? Okay, hold on. Hold on. Hold on, what did I do wrong? Let's fix it. Don't submit yet. Let's go down to weight, edit, weight, number. Oh, I forced it to 1 decimal place. I didn't realize it did that. I thought it said up to 1. So it looks like you may have to do 99.0, or if you refresh now, I just fixed it, so if you refresh, it should go away. So I'm gonna say 99.0. And email, I'm gonna put in my email address. And have you ever eaten nachos? But of course, do I use them? Yes, I use them to treat my other, my nacho craving disorder. Okay, last ate nachos, it's been a while. So anyways, you can go through and you can answer all these questions. You're seeing some questions pop up. That's called branching logic, where they show up depending on what's going on into previous questions. Okay, so I can submit that, and voila. So has anyone else been able to submit their nacho survey? If it doesn't take your weight, just add a decimal point. Put like .0, .1. I messed that up, I apologize. So let's go through and let's see what's going on. Let's take a look at our survey participants. So I can look at our record status dashboard. We have 2 people, so I'm not the only one. At least some other people have gone through. Keep working on it. And so you can now get a little fancier. So we've collected a bunch of data from patients. You can now do things like go longitudinal. You can go ahead and you can convert this project over into a longitudinal project where you're going to collect the same CRF on multiple occasions. So I'm going to very quickly go back into my project and figure out how to stop PowerPoint from doing that. And now that I'm back in my project, I can go to project setup again. And I can say, you know what, I'm going to enable longitudinal data capture. I really want to capture this information on more than one occasion. And I can go ahead then and I could set up events. I could say, I want to capture this after the nacho intervention, where we explain all the bad things that nachos do. So this could be my post-intervention time point. And I'm leaving the days off for now. That's if you want to do scheduling. REDCap can help you maintain a study calendar and help you maintain when your patients are due if they're offset for various events. Then I need to go ahead and say I want to collect the nacho craving index post-intervention. And now that I have all that information, I can go back and I can do one more thing. I can say, you know what? They gave me an email field, which I forgot to validate as an email, I think. Let's go back. And had I validated my email address right here as an email, now if I go back to my project setup, I can say that I want to use that email address to send out future surveys. So now I can already take those of you that submitted your data, and I can, in one fell swoop, come in and I can say, I'm going to send out my post-intervention survey to those people. So some people didn't submit an email, some people did. I can go ahead and say compose an invitation. It's going to grab all those email addresses. And I can say post-intervention assessment. And you can use piping, which is a new feature. I can say dear, and then in square brackets, first name. And if you gave me a first name, it's going to show up in this email template. Please complete the post-intervention assessment. And then it's going to include the link automatically. I could say when I want this sent and go ahead and send the emails. And so all of those that completed it should get an email in a second, and you could click on it and fill out your second half of the data. You can also do automated invitations, so you can set up criteria when you don't have everybody doing it at once. When you want time points and people are enrolling over a long period of time, you can keep a sort of regimented survey scale. There's a lot of things you can do with the surveys. So we've got a few more minutes until I'm going to turn it over. And what I'm going to do is just give you a flyby of some of the more complex things that you can do so that you've seen it. I don't think I'm going to do the SAS export, but you can take this data and you can dump it straight into SAS if you do that, or SPSS, or Excel. There's a number of different ways that you can do it. And now there's the API functionality. And so there is a way, although we haven't done it very often, where you can even use the API to just regenerate a report without having to re-export the data manually. So let's say you're in a big study and every week you get together as a group and you want to see the latest numbers. You could set up this automated report and just hit run on SAS, kick out the report, and you'd be all set to go and look like a pro. So, as I said, the data dictionary, that's what you call all of your questions and the types. You can do the online editor, which is what I've been doing for the past few minutes. But if you're doing a lot of repetitive stuff, or if you already have a lot of questions, you can also edit your data dictionary in Excel as a CSV file. And so oftentimes people will have a chunk that they want to repeat. It's great to just pull it up in Excel, copy the column, or copy the rows, paste them, and then rename the actual variable field names, because those have to be unique. So if you ever feel yourself saying there's got to be a better way to do this, there probably is. So please don't be a martyr. Come send an email and ask for help, and we'll find a smarter way to do it.
And then one other thing, if you're taking a database, like for example, if you have a Qualtrics database and you want to convert it to REDCap, just take the data dictionary from Qualtrics or from whatever other database you have and adjust it, and then upload it into REDCap. It makes it very easy. You don't have to reinvent your database. Just reformat it.
So as I showed you, validation, this is painful. Okay, it's not a lot of fun to sit there and do the validation up front. But if it's especially if it's a long-term project, it's really a pain well spent, because if you don't do it, when it comes time to analyze the data, you're going to have a nightmare in most cases. So this is something that's painful. It takes testing to get it right. I should have tested my survey before I sent it out to the world. But it's worth the effort in the long run. There's this whole idea of identifiers. You can mark certain questions as PHI, and then you can grant some people access to your project but say they cannot export the PHI. So most statisticians actually don't want the PHI. They don't even want to have access to it. They just want the data to crunch the numbers. And so REDCap helps you do that. There are some caveats. It doesn't work perfectly. They're going to improve it, but it is there. Let's see, branching logic. You can basically hide and show questions, based on whether or not the question applies. And you can get really complicated with this. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can then mess it up terribly and be stuck with all these error boxes. Who's been there? Anybody? So I recommend that you hold off on the branching logic until the end. Then, unless it comes to you intuitively and you get it, come see me and we'll do a couple together and help you get started on it. But don't do too much branching early on. And branching is really only helpful if you have naive users that are doing the data entry, right? If everybody's a pro and they know what applies and what doesn't apply, then you really don't need to spend the time doing it. Just have them fill it in. You can do file attachments. So I like the idea of having everything for a project in one place. And REDCap can be that one place. You can attach files globally to the project, like protocols. You can attach files per field to a record. So you can attach a scanned PDF of the consent form. You can have people submit resumes or publication lists, whatever it is, you can collect documents. Currently we cap it at 32 megabytes, so it's not intended to be like a file repository for your sequencing data, but we're trying to find ways to do larger data sets for videos and things like that. Then I showed you a little bit about the idea of longitudinal, where here's a case where you have longitudinal, you have different events in your study, you can go out for years, and you can have different surveys or things automatically happen at those times, and then you can enroll whatever forms you want only for those events for which they apply. And then you can even take this one step further and do ARMS, where you can take your study and break it into placebo or substance A or B, and it can get pretty complicated. There's a lot of user rights that are not very intuitive. They finally added user roles, which means you can define a role, and if you're going to have a lot of people on your project, you can take half a dozen people and throw them into one role, and that way you only have to administer the permissions once. You don't have to do it for every user. If you have questions about these, read the help or come see me. They're kind of difficult. Data access groups is a really cool feature if you're collaborating with other people. You can, in this example, we have collaborators at a number of different institutions. They're all entering data in Stanford's REDCap instance, but we want to make sure that the patients that Michigan are entering are not visible by the other institutions. They're only visible by those people that are sort of the overall administrators for the project. So you can use this to do all sorts of segmenting of your data from a permissions level. Because it's HIPAA compliant, it logs everything, every page view, every save, everything you do is logged. So if there's ever a question about how did that record change, you can click on the history button and get a full log of what happened. And there's even a new feature. Here's an example of the field history. You can require people to submit, this is optional, why they made changes. So if you have a project where you really don't want people changing things unless they absolutely have to, you can make them type in a reason. And then they have this new thing called the data resolution workflow. If you're having, say, a bunch of undergrads do data entry, you've collected all this stuff on paper, and they have a question, they can't read a number, or they think, like in this case, I think maybe they entered their weight or their height in the wrong units. Should I correct it? Should I make that assumption? They can essentially open a trouble ticket. It's like a ticket on that data entry that you as an administrator can view all the tickets. You can click in and see the record in the field. You can then resolve it and make a decision. So it's a nice way to have people that aren't intimate with the data do the data entry and then leave all the tough decisions for you so that they don't make an assumption that you wouldn't make. Plugins, if anyone got a text message back a year and a half ago or whatever during the encryption process, I wrote a plugin that allowed us to send text messages. So from a project, you could just click once, and if there was a telephone number field in the project, it would automatically generate a template. You just push send, and it would send a text message. So that's an example of a plugin. For Sean Mackey's group, we made pain maps. So these are these interactive maps where the patient on the iPad can just touch where it hurts, or they can click where it hurts. This is an example of sort of enhancing REDCap to do something it doesn't normally do. And then here's the API where you can you generate a token, which is like a username and password for your project, and there's a whole documentation list where you can pull the questions, the data, all that stuff. Here's an example of a long-term automated survey project where they're sending the patient a link to this survey every week for a long period of time. It actually goes way over up there to the top of the room. And then we're doing this auto-continuing feature where it's really multiple surveys, but the patient just sees it as one survey. So they just kind of march through and take all 4 of these instruments. And then once a month, they actually take a couple extra instruments. And as soon as they complete them, they get scheduled, so they'll get an email a week later with the next set. So all the project admin has to do is just kind of keep an eye on the patients and figure out which ones haven't responded to their survey email and resend it or give them a call to find out why. Here's a way of doing one-to-many forms. In this case, these are pregnancies, and we're looking to see what happens in REI, and you might have a number of ultrasounds that occur in the REI's office. It depends on how many you have. They don't know. They said, we think 6 is the most we're going to have. Here's a patient that had 5, and then you have other things that you measure only once, and then here's all the visits. For each visit, there's vitals that get acquired. And because we're collecting the data this way, it's really easy for us to, like, for example, do a plot of the patient's weight over time. Because all the data is collected here longitudinally. And then they created one box for each infant that came out of the pregnancy. And these ones just aren't being used for this record, but for a different record, they might be used. Okay, so common questions. Why can't I do more reporting in REDCap? And my answer is it's for data capture. It can do some reporting, but not a lot. If you want to do a lot of reporting, take it to R or SPSS or SAS. You can collaborate. You just need to sponsor them for SUNET accounts. It's free. There's wiki entries on how to do that. There's this thing called production. You can move your project into production, and that helps to prevent you from accidentally deleting data by sending an email to me. The downside is it means you have to wait 24 hours typically for your change to be approved. So people all the time ask me, when should I do this? And I say when losing your data would be painful. So I've gotten a number of calls at 2 in the morning, or not a number, I've gotten a call at 2 in the morning on a Saturday by someone who said, my wife is so distraught that she can't even call you, she can't speak. She just accidentally deleted the data. Oh my gosh, and it turned out it wasn't that big of a deal, so we were able to fix it. All right, so can you get help? Yes, you can get help, and I do a lot of consulting, or not consulting, but paid things if I have time. I just don't have that much time. We're hoping to get more staff, but we have a lot of groups that say, you know what, I just want to have somebody really help get my project going and get it going in the right direction, and so they'll budget 20 hours or 30 hours, and then I'll come to a couple meetings and I'll sort of sit there and help get the thing going. We don't own the projects, we really want you guys to own them, but I want to help you get them set up correctly. There's our website, and you can also click this button in the middle to get a hold of us. And all right, sorry, I might have gone a little bit long, but
That's great. So that was an excellent overview, and I think he showed you a lot of the features I was going to show you, but maybe what I'll do is just pull up some of the projects I've done and tell you about some key learning points that I've learned, and then go from there. So in order to access, do you guys know how to access the REDCap? You just in your browser, redcap.stanford.edu. You know what? I don't know how to use the Mac. Okay. I might need your help.
so the most important thing we do is I hit save site so that I can know your password forever.
Oh.
So the two-step authentication is something that any collaborators, if you do that, they're going to have to go through. Does anybody use the printed list of two-step authentication? Nobody? Oh. Get rid of the printed list. Go to the SMS. If you work in the bowels of the hospital and can't get text messages, you can install the Google Authenticator app. So the printed list is a bane of support.
Okay, so we'll go to My Projects, which is a list of all your REDCap database. So I just,
You need to push hard.
oh, I see, okay. Okay, so here are my projects. So this first project was actually a fellow project, and we had the hypothesis that, well, actually, there was a publication that showed ferritin levels greater than 10,000 was highly associated, or actually sensitive and specific for this syndrome called macrophage activation syndrome. And we wanted to see whether we were missing the diagnosis at Stanford. So we asked the STRIDE team to pull a list of patients that have ever had a ferritin level greater than 10,000. And the nice thing is that they actually were able to give me an Excel sheet with a lot of the data that I needed, included the ferritin levels, the dates, the demographics, and we were able to just upload it into our project here. So I can't actually show you a lot because I have patient information in there, but I'll just put a new one just so you could see the form. So here you can see all this data just came from STRIDE, so it uploaded. We didn't have to do the data entry. So with this project, or with all projects, actually, you can do something called the report builder, where this is where you can make reports, and then down below here, actually, yeah, it's off the screen.
I don't think there's anything more we're trying to find.
Right here. So then you go down here to reports, and those are all the reports you've made. So this is great if you're just having meetings and you want to kind of discuss where your data is. I mean, ultimately, you're going to download this into a statistical analysis program. But, you know, for example, I just made this quick report that showed you know, the patient ID, what was the primary underlying disease? You know, did the patient have the diagnosis of HLH, whether it's complete or incomplete, and whether or not the patient died. But anyways, you could have a number of fields in these reports, and they're very easy and quick to build. Let me go to another database.